My name is Nigel. I'm from Denver, Colorado, by way of New Hampshire, the Granite State.
Ladies and gentlemen, start your engines.
I got into motorcycles because I was always into them as a kid. Friends always rode dirt bikes. I wanted to ride dirt bikes. Jesse James and Monster Garage was on TV making choppers look cool. It wasn't until I was 21 that I bought my first bike. And that night I tore it down intending to turn it into a chopper. A year later it was a cafe racer. My dad owns a restoration shop, so he's the one who taught me how to weld and fabricate. And I worked there on and off for 10 years. Then I moved out here. I was very fortunate to get a job at a local custom Harley shop where I kind of fine-tuned those skills into working on motorcycles, building motorcycles. And this Buell right here is my second build. So I've only actually done 2 bikes. So I guess I haven't been doing it too long. People who knew I had entered it, that they felt really confident that I was gonna get in, but I just kind of was, I don't know, dismissive of it and didn't think something like that, I'd get chosen for something like that. And I remember seeing the notification on my phone that I had been tagged in the Greasy Dozen post, and even up until I saw my name on one of the pictures, I didn't really believe that it was happening. At first I was super excited to be in this really small gallery of bike builders, grassroots builders. But at the same time, I started getting extremely stressed after working in restorations and also, building bikes for a year. I understood how deadlines just creep up on you so fast, and the build I had submitted was really ambitious. So for probably equal parts excited and stressed, for sure. So this started out as a 2002 Buell Lightning S3T. So it was a touring model, came with bags, had a big old sport bike fairing on it. It was fuel injected. So that's what it started life as. And I knew I wanted to turn it into something that could handle Colorado's roads that change from pavement to dirt. And I wanted to put the shock in a traditional place, and that kind of started this whole uphill battle of how to make this vision not only cosmetically come to life, but actually be a functioning motorcycle. Well, the inspiration for the build really came from my family's background in auto sport racing, sports car racing. I grew up at racetracks in the 90s and always remember taking my uncle's race car apart or my dad's race car apart, and everything was usually aluminum or fiberglass. They were these really basic light machines, tube frame cars, and I really wanted to build something that was kind of from that era, the late 80s, mid 90s, where, I don't know, performance just seemed to have a no frills kind of thing to it. So that was the base inspiration. I bought this carburetor when I bought the bike, and it's a 2-barrel similar to a Weber, and that pretty much ingrained the generation for it. So that was really the biggest inspiration for the look of the bike, and then it being kind of a dual sport tracker shaped everything else. The reason, I guess, everything else looks the way it does. Try to make it look like a hooligan or flat track bike. I named it Time's Up because very quickly after the whole coronavirus thing happened, the deadline was getting extremely close. The amount of time I had to work on the bike was getting thinner and thinner. And it was just like, time's up, man. You got to get the bike done. If you can't fail at something like this your first time, showing the world a bike you build. So that's the name I'm going with. I think it's fitting because I still don't think it's finished. Favorable moments during the build process. I think early on, my favorite moment was when I finished the intake manifold for the carburetor. It's a true two-throat intake manifold that I built to adapt this carburetor to the Buell motor. After that, I think maybe when I leak tested the fuel tank and it didn't leak that much, except from the top. I think those were the only favorable moments until I finished it. Otherwise, it was just a lot of stress and trying to build things that were in my head and not having enough time to do them. Starting with the rear suspension, the swing arm was supposed to be made out of chromoly, and I went to a friend's shop to use their bender. The hydraulic bender didn't have the right size dies for the 1 1/8 tubing, so I tried using a manual bender and the chromoly wouldn't bend. So I ended up having to scrap all of that tubing and find some DOM that I could use. Finally got the swing arm done, and then trying to figure out how to get the shock to actually fit through the frame, because the fluid reservoir actually hit the frame in a traditional mounting, so I had to cut the top of the shock off so I could turn it at a 45-degree angle. I mean, probably everything was a setback. The whole thing was based on designs in my head. There is no aftermarket parts for Buells, so it wasn't even like I could buy something if what I wanted to build didn't work out. So the whole bike is just a gigantic setback that I had to overcome. Two big things that I've definitely learned building this bike. I've always been told by my dad, my boss, anybody who's been doing this longer than I have, to always keep it simple. I grew up with the term KISS, K-I-S-S. Keep it simple, stupid. And I have a tendency to think large and grandiose, and this build definitely showed me that, as cool as that might be, it's just not feasible, especially when you have a deadline. The other thing I learned is that I can build things in a really short amount of time. I basically built this bike 30 minutes at a time throughout the last 6 to 8 months, and having to be really efficient with my time to build the things that I wanted to, and to not be making parts over and over again, trying to get it right. I kind of learned that I'm faster than I think I am with those things, and that if I kind of just keep my head down and finish the first draft or whatever, I actually get stuff done rather than reimagining it a million times. This bike is definitely not a great example of paint. It was, even at the very beginning of the build thought process, I knew I wanted it to just be a pretty simple block color, if you will, with a lot of exposed polished aluminum. But I did the paint with some graffiti rattle cans, because I figured that would be a little bit better than your box store spray paint. The flames on it were done by local legend, Rody. I really wanted this to have some appeal to the chopper crowd, the things that really always made me want to get into motorcycles. So put those on there to kind of tie some of the other red elements that are there. I don't think paint is what's attracting people to this bike at all. And if it is, I think I've failed in all of the other things I built for the bike. Now that I'm done the build, I've been just trying to work all the bugs out of it, see what needs to be tightened up and leaks that need to be fixed and some other things. I didn't get to build everything I wanted to for the bike, so I think now, over, however long, I'll be kind of finishing up some of the other things I wanted to do to the bike that I just didn't have time to. But riding it is definitely what I'm going to be trying to do the most. You put this much time and effort and stress and lack of sleep into something that is a functioning vehicle. I think all you really want to do is rip it around, and so far it's been a lot more fun to ride than I thought. I've got more builds than I know what to do with. At the moment, I'm not really thinking about the next build. It's kind of nice not having to do something every single night. So right now I'm just gonna play around with this. Well, it took a small village for this. I think out of either pride or being stubborn, I did almost everything on the bike myself, but it definitely wouldn't have been possible without a lot of key players. Firstly, the shop that I work at for allowing me to take time off of work during the day to get things done. So LaFours in Lakewood, Colorado has been more than generous. I mean, the knowledge that Mike has given me while I've been working there has gone directly into this. His input on how to do things has definitely been a large part of how I built this. I'd also like to thank Cody and Kevin at Keebler Customs and Lucky Horse Customs. They were the ones who bent the tubes. They had the tubing bender that I needed, so they made that all look really nice and professional. I'd also like to thank Casey Fleming, who does airbrushing and other things over there, but he die cut the stickers on this thing that really kind of made it look like a race bike. I'd like to thank my dad for spending hours on the phone with me when I'd come across engineering problems and trying to figure out how to make stuff work and what the best avenue was. I'd like to thank my friend Enrique for making this thing look good throughout the build process. It certainly wouldn't have looked as good without him taking the pictures. And I'd like to thank Old Bike Barn for hosting this event and also providing us money to be able to buy some of the things to make these things run. Lowbrow Customs for having a ton of fabrication parts. As much as I like building my own stuff, it's nice to be able to just buy something and weld it in. I'd like to send a huge shout out to S&S for being one of the biggest sponsors of the event and making this thing run like an absolute nutcase, especially for having no front brake. It is absolutely terrifying with the camshafts that I put in there. I'd like to thank Chop Cult for supporting and showing off everybody's builds when they can. Builtwell, they're the ones who provided the foot pegs on this, and they fit the bike perfectly. Oh, I'd like to thank DEI, especially because this bike runs insanely hot with 10-to-1 compression, and my fuel lines run completely around the cylinder head, so they provided all the heat wrap and stuff to keep this thing running cool. Instagram's pretty much the only platform I use. You can find me at Nigel Made This on there, NigelMadeThis, and that's where you can find this build and future builds, as well as pictures of my dog.